Welcome. Thank you all for attending this evening's event. I'm Lisa McLean, Vice President of Programs and Events for the League of Women Voters, Los Altos Mountain View. Before we start, let's go over some housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded for future viewing and will be available from our website. All attendees have been muted. You may want to select Speaker View to see the speakers better. Otherwise, you will be looking for them in tiny little windows. At the top of the right corner of your screen, you should see View, which will allow you to select Speaker or Gallery View. You can change this setting at any time during the event. Questions for the speakers will be at the end of the presentation. As you think of questions, submit them in the chat, and after the presentation, we will use the first 20 minutes to ask the questions that have been submitted. Following that, we will open it up to comments and suggestions about how we can apply what we have learned to discussing our local issues. For now, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I want to thank our event co-sponsors, Leadership Mountain View and the Mountain View Chamber of Commerce, and our members who have helped make this event possible. The idea for this event was brought to the League 2 years ago by several members of Leadership Mountain View's class of 2020 who were concerned about the polarization in our country leading up to the presidential election. As our class project, we wanted to have an event about how to have more open and constructive discussions around divisive issues. This is a perfect fit for our League, as one of our League's top priorities is hosting civil discourse events around community issues, and part of our mission is to encourage each of us to use our voice and become active participants in our communities. You have likely noticed that, similar to our national politics, we are seeing increasing polarization around our local issues. How can we work together as a community to solve our problems if we cannot talk to each other? Tonight, we will learn how the America in One Room conference was able to bridge the divide, moderating many participants' opinions on some of our country's most divisive issues. We will then consider how we can use its methods at the local level to facilitate more constructive discussions here. Our speakers tonight are Jim Fishkin, a professor at Stanford and the director of the Center for Deliberative Democracy, and Alice Su, who is the associate director. Together, along with collaborators globally, they have implemented deliberative polling in over 30 countries and jurisdictions, over 120 projects, and on a variety of topics. This evening, they are speaking about the 2019 America in One Room National Deliberative Polling event that was held in Dallas, where 526 people from across the US gathered. They will also speak about last month's America in One Room Climate and Energy National Deliberative Polling event, held online using the center's own artificial intelligence-based deliberative platform, where almost 1,000 people from across the country participated. Jim and Alice, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to speak first and then turn it over to Alice, and Alice is going to share screen, and she'll be in charge of all the slides and also a little bit of video that we'll show you. So I'm going to speak. First, I'm going to make a few remarks about the general concept of deliberative polling, and then we'll show you some results from America in One Room 2019. And then I'm going to turn it over to Alice, who will show some results from the climate and energy deliberative poll that we conducted just a few weeks ago, and we just reported on the results recently. So why should you be interested? Why should anybody interested in democracy be interested in deliberation? That seems like a fancy word. Deliberation is about public will formation. It's about the people thinking about the issues in an evidence-based way and considering the pros and cons of arguments with each other. Now, that's such an obvious priority that you might say, well, of course, we all do that all the time. But in fact, studies of public opinion show that many people are inattentive. They don't think about the issues. They're subject to what social scientists call rational ignorance. If I've got one vote in millions, why should I pay a lot of attention? And the people who do pay attention tend to talk to people like themselves. They tend, if they get their news from social media, as many, many people do, they tend to be in their own filter bubbles, talking to the like-minded. They tend to consult news sources they already agree with. And our public sphere has decomposed. The whole idea of the whole rationale for freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of association, as for example articulated by John Stuart Mill, was that truth would collide with error, and people would, from that collision, they would learn to think for themselves. But suppose they all get lost in the fog and with the filter bubbles, they never collide. People on one side never hear or even consider the concerns or arguments or interests of people on the other side. And if they hear arguments, they'll latch onto the ones they already agree with. So we conduct experiments, many of them advisory to real public policy decisions through a method called deliberative polling. And lately, we've been experimenting with scaling that deliberation, and that's why we've developed the technology with the crowdsourced democracy team at Stanford in management science and engineering. We've developed the technology that Alice is going to show you. Alice, next slide. So the solution to polarization is this common sense idea, which I think the League of Women Voters is very committed to, that there should be civil discussion based on evidence and information where people from different points of view actually talk to each other and listen to each other. So for many years now, since I proposed deliberative polling in 1988, which now I guess dates me, it's a long time ago, we have been doing these projects with random samples of the population, and where we can, with control groups, so that we see that they're actually scientific experiments, field experiments. And as was announced at the beginning, they've been done all over the world, every inhabited continent, and in South America, North America, Europe, Africa, Asia. And the results are the same. It's just as efficacious. We just adopt it in places where the public is not literate. We just adopt it for the less literate. And people all over the world are smart if you can get their attention and motivate them to do the hard work to think through the trade-offs of issues that affect their communities or their countries. Next slide. So these are photos. That's a photo montage from this Dallas event. Next slide. So we had a scientific sample of 523 registered voters from all over the country, recruited by NORC at the University of Chicago. They are one of the premier public opinion research organizations. For those selected in the sample, they come back many times in order to recruit the sample and make it representative. And people are provided with child care, extra there's a hardship fund. The NORC has a concierge method where there's a concierge who would solve any problem that might be an impediment to somebody participating. And we compensated the participants also as a gesture of appreciation for their time. In any case, NORC recruited an excellent sample and a control group that we can compare. The control group just answered the questions at the time of recruitment and at the end, and they helped show that the changes were due to the deliberation of the participants and not something else going on in the news. The control group changed hardly at all. Next slide. And there were 5 big issue areas. I mean, this was an enormous event. You see, we actually recruited and transported all these people to this big hotel near the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. That's why we chose Dallas, because it was central and people could easily fly in, and then also, just as importantly, fly home from all over the country at the end. So they arrived Thursday and they left Sunday afternoon, and they deliberated in depth on these 5 issue areas, all kinds of specific proposals where the materials, which are posted online, would lay out proposals and the strongest arguments, as vetted by an advisory group of experts from different points of view and all over the country, the strongest arguments that could be identified in favor or against each of the proposals. Next slide. And the New York Times did us a great favor. They actually, with permission, published the pictures of the participants in the sample, saying, this is what America looks like. You could see the diversity just from the pictures if you look at our website or the New York Times upshot. They were from everywhere and representative of all the race, ethnicity, class. We have all the information about them. Of course, we don't identify the names. Their first names identified there by permission, but in our data set, we only have, they're numbered. Next slide. Oh, just to say, if you're subject to what I called rational ignorance, because you don't think your voice matters, if you're in a small group and you're deliberating together, you think your voice matters in that group. Speaking in public is actually one of the things that many people are most nervous about. So in preparation, they read the materials, they think about the issues, and most importantly, with a civil atmosphere, they talk to each other. And one of the things that we found was that there were very large changes of opinion by party. So in this slide and the next, this is about the Republicans, the next one about the Democrats. There were big movements in the percentages supporting or opposing various highly contested issues. So this was the issue on immigration, which you will remember back in September 2019 was one of the really hot issues. It's becoming a hot issue again. So among the Republicans, support for forcing undocumented immigrants to return to their home countries before applying to live and work in the US went from 79% to 40%. You see the line going down from, well, that's an earthquake in public opinion. Support for reducing the number of refugees allowed to settle in the US, that went down from 66 to 34%. Support for admitting more visas for high-skilled workers went from 50 to 72%. And support for DACA, which protects from deportation children brought to the US, went from 36% to 61%, as you can see. Well, these are big changes of opinion, and people opened up to the discussion to the other perspective. Now, this was a sample of US citizens because it was a sample actually of registered voters. So there were no undocumented in the sample. We didn't want to but many of the participants in the sample were related to those who were undocumented or descended from those, and the perspective of the undocumented was well represented in the discussions. Next slide. And on the Democratic side, remember, this is before COVID. This is September 2019. Support for raising the federal minimum wage nationally dropped from 83% to 59% as people talked from across the country about the differences in the wages and working conditions in different states. Support for basically Medicare for all, automatic enrollment in a more generous version of Medicare, went down 14 points. Support for what was Cory Booker's proposal for a government-funded baby bond that every child would get when they were born went from 62% to 21%. So these were very big changes in terms on the left, moving a bit to the center. Next slide, please. And even affective polarization, well, this was views about people who are not thinking, who you disagree with. They moved towards giving other people who they disagree with more credit. Next slide. Now I'm going to show you this video, which gives you a sense of the discussions. And these are discussions with moderators in the randomly assigned small groups. So CNN did an interesting report. It's about 3 minutes long. And I'm going to ask Alice to show it because it shows a big transformation of opinion, although a lot of heat at the beginning, and then a lot of light by the end. And the people who clashed, developing a great deal of mutual respect for each other. So I think it's a very good video. Alice, do you want to show that now? You have to press on the, you have to put your cursor right on the left to get it started.
In the heart of Texas.
Last table on your left, they will check you in.
A little bit more serious, that's beautiful. Yeah, there, that's great.
526 Americans gathering.
I love this. Great, thank you so much.
Upset about the partisan divide.
Let's be real.
This is an experiment, a scientific sample, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, representing 47 states.
You are going to listen to other people whom you never ordinarily would encounter.
Reflecting who votes on Election Day.
Hey, how are you?
It's a 4-day in-person poll called America in One Room. Before arriving, this group took one poll on the major issues in the 2020 election. Here,
It's a great question.
they listened to candidates, to experts,
This is really your time to have your voice heard.
and break into randomly selected small groups to talk.
When's the last time you talked to a 70-year-old white Republican?
I don't think I've ever talked to a 70-year-old white Republican, until now.
You know, we're being stormed at the southern border, and that's a problem that needs to be dealt with.
The illegal immigrants that we have today, you can see it all of the time, waving their country's flags, burning the American flag.
Sure, on TV you see the ones that do all this crazy stuff, but most of them work.
Like the country, this group is deeply divided about immigration.
I feel like you should have a wall, a border wall.
And along comes ICE, deports them. How can we continue to do that? In America.
We don't want to learn your language. We don't want to follow your customs. We follow our own customs. And to me, it looks like they don't want to become Americans.
You know, Gary, your family were illegal immigrants. The American Indians, this was their country.
Yeah.
All of us came here, and we didn't learn their language. We didn't learn their customs. We said, you take ours, and you take it now. So we're all children of illegal immigrants. I don't know how we can be so choosy about the new ones.
That got to be a little heated in there.
It definitely did. But we've all respected one another and got to hear each other's opinions. And I never thought I would be able to relate to someone that was a Republican. And I have, more than once.
More than once.
Right.
I think it's been interesting to talk to Trump supporters, because I don't meet many.
She's like, I don't want to be a part of this.
Seeing all of these people from all of these other walks of life, exactly how my views have changed on it, I'm not so hardcore.
And what is your advice about political discourse in this country?
You need to listen, not yell. not scream. You need to talk.
At the end,
And this is how your voice will be heard.
a closing poll to see if there's been any movement on the issues, but already visible.
It's opened my mind to see that I need to listen to other people's views.
Is the recognition that there is unexpected power
I really enjoyed you being here.
in bridging the divide.
I have enjoyed this beyond measure.
Good. So now we have developed a technology, and during COVID, we've made special use of it. The technology allows, it uses a little bit of AI, but it's primarily, it's a little bit like Zoom, but it provides the means for a small group of 10 people or so to moderate its own discussions. It controls access to the microphone. It provides, it leads the participants through an agenda, just as the face-to-face deliberative poll does, in terms of considering the each policy proposal, and asks them whether they think they've discussed it sufficiently, and it moves to the next. And we developed it primarily because we're interested in the idea of scaling the discussions to much larger numbers. But we used it recently in this National Climate Change Deliberative Poll, and we view this as a controlled experiment which provides proof of concept, because the Climate Change Deliberative Poll was another national sample just as good as the one that gathered face-to-face. And it also led to important changes of opinion, statistically significant changes of opinion on the issues, the current issue that is facing us as the Glasgow Summit is convening. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alice. Alice, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here. As Lisa was saying at the beginning, this was a talk that was 2 years in the making, and we finally get to have this conversation. And I have the great pleasure of talking about the results that we just released on Tuesday. So this is just hot off the presses, and it's been really wonderful to see the news coverage already that we've gotten for this event. And as Jim noted, we had a national sample of people 18 and over for this particular deliberation. And we had 962 participants in total for the deliberations, and additionally had a control group as well that completed only the survey before and after. And the process was exactly the same as we did in person, except we brought it all online, and allowing groups to discuss in their small groups, and then having large plenary sessions with panels where they listen to experts and pose questions to themselves. So it was very exciting to see so many people attend the event. We had 104 small groups, and they varied in sizes. They stayed with the same small group throughout the entire deliberation, just as they did in the face-to-face version. And this is really to allow groups to build that group rapport and dynamic, to be able to engage with each other for a long period of time. In total, they spent close to 11 hours together, either over the course of a weekend, or we had a weekday option where they spent Tuesday, Thursday evenings together for a few hours each day. We had an extremely representative sample based on gender, party affiliation, age, and race and ethnicity. And more details, now that the results are released, you can visit our center's website to view all the details about the participants that came, and also watch a webinar that the Harvard School of Public Health launched for us with us on Tuesday, where actually Senator Lindsey Graham and Jean Shaheen also spoke about the results and the importance of having direction for climate and energy policy in the country. Now, on the note about policy changes, we had a very extensive set of questions for the participants to talk about, and 72 substantive questions. And out of the 72, 68 of them, almost all of them changed very significantly after deliberation. And among the ones that did change significantly, they were all in the direction about doing more to combat climate change. And keeping in mind, we had a very representative sample attend our event across party affiliation and education, et cetera. So now, as I present these results, we've broken it down by party and also the overall for the participants, the 900 plus. So one of the first questions we asked was whether rising temperatures are caused by human activities that emit greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane, which trap heat in the atmosphere and warm the Earth's climate. Overall, you see all the way on the left, the overall sample increased almost 10 points, 10 percentage points. And we've broken it down by party. You see that those that identified themselves as Democrats increased a bit, but they were really high, above 90 to begin with. And among independents and Republicans, you see a very dramatic increase for those that identified themselves as independents and Republicans, a 13 percentage point increase for independents, on almost a 20 percentage point increase for Republicans. And this is just the beginning, really, of the very dramatic results that we saw, not only with respect to participants' views towards policies and their thinking towards climate and energy, but also about what they want to do in terms of the policy proposals. We asked a series of questions. This was one of them, about how worried people were about the natural environment. And you see increases across the board, and especially among independents, that increased 33 percentage points from 48, below 50%, all the way to 81% after deliberation. And in terms of, just realizing the effect and the importance of this matter, we asked whether failure to address these issues will threaten human life on Earth within the next century. And you can see that overwhelming majority of participants really supported this, agreed with this statement, increases significantly. And net zero was one of the main discussions across the policy proposals, as we were talking about the different energy options that our country should be discussing, whether it be capturing greenhouse gases, or whether it be investing in the grids, or doing other things to reach net zero. But the overall concept of net zero, we found that participants really decided to support and offer greater support after deliberation as well, with overall increase among the close to 1,000 people of 11%, and increases among all of the folks when broken down by party as well. One that a lot of people, not just in the US, have been talking about is coal, and whether we can stop using it at some point in the future or near future. And we see dramatic increases here as well. And we do ask about each and every different type of energy source in our survey. The participants discussed a great deal about all the different types of energy sources. And so for a more in-depth analysis of what the participants thought about each of the different energy sources, solar, wind, offshore wind, onshore wind, you can definitely take a closer look at the results that are on our website right now. Elimination of fossil fuels in the generation of electricity. This is something that was discussed a lot. And I would say we also had a number of questions about something more close to home, going all electric with vehicles by 2035. We also had proposals about requiring new homes that use non-gas appliances. That's potentially something that I know many of us may be thinking about. I believe recently it was some cities around us have actually decided to put those up as considerations for enacting. So not so far-fetched in terms of whether these things can happen in our own communities. Here, talking about fossil fuels and steel production, also increasing across the board, and biofuels as well. Just giving you a snapshot of all the different types of sources that we talked about, and the just overall increases that were had post deliberation, no matter what party they said they belonged in. And we, just to point out, we broke these down by party for this discussion in particular, because we're talking about polarization and why polarization is such a hot topic these days. And we were also thinking about whether climate and energy and topic like this would be difficult to be had at this point in our country. But we found that the conversations were extremely robust, and people didn't really have party politics in mind when they had these discussions. People were very focused on what the actual policy proposals were. And here's a last example here about enacting standards for utilities to limit greenhouse gases in the production of electricity, also increasing. We had very interesting results for nuclear as well. There were actually increasing in support from those that were from California, surprisingly enough. And you can definitely check out the results there to see, because we broke a lot of things out by states, and in particular for our California and for Texas, two of the largest states and most, opposite of each other. And we really wanted to know, what the differences were between Californians and Texas. And across the board, as we were doing our analysis, we found that they were not so different from each other. Really, people in the country, as they're talking about climate and energy policies, they are actually really aligned on a lot of these issues. Now, I see we only have about 5-ish minutes, 5 to 10 minutes left. So I'm going to start talking about the platform itself. Jim gave us a brief preview about why we decided to create this platform. And indeed, we have been very concerned with how to scale deliberation. And when we got together with our engineering colleagues, one of the biggest questions was, how do we improve our ability to engage the public while also having high quality deliberation and very consistent experiences. Because as we all know, technology can be wonderful, but also, hampers us at times. And we wanted to provide an experience where anyone, no matter what their technology level is, could participate. And so we designed this deliberation platform based on our experience with deliberative polling and using all the different features that a moderator would have during a deliberative polling session. And we included features such as a speaking cue. That is quite natural. It's just like here as we go into Q&A phase, and people may raise their hands or they may pose questions in a certain order. And the platform does the same. They get in line as they raise their hand and wait for their turn. They're allowed to speak for a certain amount of time. So it's a timed process. They have a timed agenda, just as our meeting would be. Each section in the agenda is allotted to a certain amount of time. And participants actually can decide if they wanted to move on to the next topic. If they felt like they've talked about agenda 1 sufficiently, they can click move on, and then the platform prompts the entire group to decide whether the group as a whole wants to move on. And they can do this together. And that's one of the group decision-making features that Jim had referred to. We also have real-time transcriptions, which really allows us to have real-time analytics of what's happening in the deliberation. Oftentimes when we do many of these events in person, and we need to kind of keep an eye on all the groups to make sure everything is proceeding as planned, you need a lot of manpower to do that. But on the platform, really for us, because it is virtual, we can actually have multiple tabs open, one for each group. And we have real-time transcripts that transcribe the discussion, and we can just read the discussion as it's happening, see if things are going on, and we can monitor a number of groups per person without having to disturb the actual deliberation at all, which is a significant improvement than opening doors and peeking in rooms to see how things are happening. We use AI to track offensive language or language that shouldn't be used. Our back-end support team, we get flags when when language does get intense. Of the hundreds of groups that we've had on the platform over the course of the last few years, there's only been one time that I had to step in to the group and ask the group to be a bit more respectful. And in most of the cases where we get flags, it's really people that are really engaged in the conversation and use language that was trying to reinforce how passionate they were about the topics they were talking about. Another feature that we built in are nudges in deliberation. And this is actually an improvement to a face-to-face discussion because, for a moderator in a face-to-face discussion, if you wanted to nudge a participant to talk or stop someone from talking, you would kind of have to pause the discussion in order to make it happen. But on the platform, since everyone has their own screen as an individual, we can actually nudge individuals simultaneously, at different times, multiple times, and give them different prompts to help them and encourage them to actually speak and join the conversation. And this has been proven to really be effective in helping people nudge them and get them to participate. We've built a question development process as well that mirrors our face-to-face version, that allows the entire group to propose questions, edit questions together, and vote and rank on questions in that period where the top 2 questions are then passed to the plenary session experts. But to give you an idea of what participants experience and what the platform is like, I give you a quick peek into the instructions that participants see when they get on the platform. Here we are.
Thank you all for joining today. This discussion is an opportunity for everyone to learn. No one is expected to be an expert. Also, no consensus is necessary. Not everyone needs to agree or disagree. Let me share with you the most important features of this platform. If you'd like to speak, please press the Request to Speak button. When you finish speaking, please press Finish Speaking. When more than one person requests to speak, you will see a queue at the side of the screen. You can see the agenda items for our discussion on the side of the screen. There are arguments for and arguments against the proposals. If you click on View Details, you will see excerpts of information from the briefing materials.
I think one issue that some countries that have it encounter is that there's too many parties, for example, in parliament. And so that means that the decision-making process becomes very slow because
If you feel your group should move on to the next agenda item, you may press Move On, and we will ask your group if they would like to move on. We are moving on to the next item on the agenda. We will now develop 2 questions for our plenary session. This process will have 4 steps. First, you may propose one question by typing it in the text box on the right. Once everyone has completed, rank the proposed questions. For step 3, your group will discuss and edit each proposed question. Finally, your group will vote for the top 2 questions. This concludes our deliberation for now. Thank you very much for participating.
And we have about a minute and a half left. So I'm going to show you quickly an actual deliberation, some clips that we have, just to give you a better sense of what it's like for having an actual deliberation on the platform.
I understand the argument of people in general areas and people in cities might have slightly different perspectives on how they want the country to vote. But land doesn't vote, people do.
I think we should find a hybrid of the two between the electoral college and a popular vote that can have the balances of the pluses of two, but can try to mitigate sort of the negatives of both.
Proportional allocation is a good middle ground. That would also ensure that every single vote matters. And again, it would de-emphasize the campaigning in the swing states.
But I think the one reason why I'm still in the middle is that swing states change over time. So candidates can't necessarily take the support of safe states for granted.
Just curious, does anyone here actually live in a swing state? Because it's never really bothered me that Maryland doesn't see many presidential candidates come to speak. You can always watch them.
Just coming from a place like New York, which always swings one way, it is so easy for people to feel like their voice doesn't matter no matter what. So I think a national popular vote would really make everyone want to be a lot more involved in this country's democracy.
And just to share, these are high school students that deliberated last year on these issues. And we have a close partnership with the Close Up Foundation based out in Washington, D.C. And they helped us gather a number of high school students from across the country to have these discussions. And a very last slide,
I understand
just to show you, these are the event evaluations from the climate change event we had. Extremely high evaluations of not only the platform, but the discussion and the event as a whole. And these evaluations are extremely comparable to our face-to-face events, just showing that participants' views and towards having these online deliberations are just as good as they were for the face-to-face. In fact, for a number of groups that we observed, participants that merely spent time online together, they were exchanging social media handles, email addresses before they left on the last day, really demonstrating that they built this group identity and just feeling that they met some friends through this process. And the last point I want to highlight before we open it up, the last result here at the bottom about, I learned a lot about people very different from me, about what they and their lives are like. And over 75% of people agreed with this statement. Really goes to show that as people come together and have these deliberations together, they get to learn about people that are different from them and that think differently from them. And it's about listening to each other and understanding that being in a democracy means that listening to each other is really not an option. And having these experiences really reinforces that and allows people to be more open to have these discussions. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Lisa.
Thank you. Interesting presentation, lots of good information. I think at this point, let's see, where am I in my notes? At this point, our league president, Karen Bricker, who has been monitoring the chat, will take the next few minutes to ask questions you have submitted in the chat. And it looks like we are comfortable in our time at the moment. So feel free to answer, both of you, if you want to answer a question. Go ahead.
Yes, and we don't have many questions yet. So please, if you have questions that you would like answered, please add them in the chat now, or we may go to raising hands. But I have one from Allison Aldrich, who said she loved the idea of scaling and wonders if the Center for Deliberative Democracy has plans to give the opportunity broadly to our country so we can learn and listen, all 350 million of us. That's my comment. Do the RNC and the DNC want to help? Or are there other entities, other groups that might collaborate on this?
Let me say something first. I think the RNC and the DNC want to win elections. I mean, enough of a political scientist to know that. But I think that there are many resources in society that could be employed to assist us with scaling. And I have this vision, maybe it's quasi-utopian, maybe it can be made realistic, that we will build up to millions of people deliberating. And I think the platform, this platform, in theory, there's no limit, but we need to develop it so that we get diverse groups in participating. And but I want to also sharply distinguish two purposes. When we do a deliberative poll with a scientific sample, we want to represent what public opinion would be if people engaged in the issue and thought about it and considered all the trade-offs. So I would distinguish deliberative polling from this kind of deliberative scaling, which we're working towards. And I think the two can go together because this process requires an agenda of issues and materials. And so what I want to do more and more is do these projects and then use the materials to scale the deliberation with other people. Many communities might want to deliberate about climate change, or they might want to deliberate about healthcare or immigration or any of the topics that we have done recently or will in the future. Political reform is another one that we want to do soon. So with those materials and the platform, and then also we have a handbook for how to conduct this face-to-face without the electronic platform. But the electronic platform, the technology, could eventually apply to very large numbers. I think we need a great civic awakening of deliberation, organized deliberation, so that people, if you just bring people together, they may just yell at each other. But if they're moderated in some way so that there's a civil atmosphere and there's availability of good evidence, you get these rather striking results. And the results are not just the results about the opinion, they're also results about the participants, their sense of efficacy, their sense that they have a voice worth listening to. That's one of our questions. A sense they become more measurably more informed about the issues. And we find that that actually has lasting effects on them. So we think there are benefits to the whole country to spreading an organized deliberative process like the one we have. And there will be others, and there are others as well. But we have the evidence that this one works in in 2 national controlled experiments recently in the US, but we've also been doing this in other countries. So we would like partners, but we would like partners who may be willing to recruit participants and engage in deliberations, and we can do our best within our limited means to make our platform available, to also make our handbook for how to do this face-to-face, if you would just want to do it on your own, how to do it, how to train the moderators if you're using human moderators. We think there should be, and we're trying to raise funds to make a much bigger initiative, and we're having some response to that. But that's what we're interested in. League of Women Voters chapters around the country could be very interesting partners for this. And Alice should tell you about this project she's doing for young people with the American Academy of Arts and Sciences now, which will just be quite soon, where the students develop the briefing materials, but it will be reported at a summit at the White House about political reform. And I guess I'm stealing your punchlines, Alice. But she's doing both a scientific sample and then an opportunity for broader numbers of young people to participate, and that's with young people across the country. Why don't you tell them about the Voice of the Future, Alice?
Sure.
And other examples.
Of course. One of the things that I have been very much concerned about and really want to push to scale in some way is to allow deliberation and curriculum for it to start early, middle schools, high schools. So our collaboration with the American Academy is with colleges. And the idea here within colleges and universities is that we can hope to institutionalize some ways of civic life and civic engagement. And we've partnered with 4 other institutions to do a cross institutional national practicum. So we're involved at Stanford, and then we have students and classes at Marquette University, Slippery Rock University, and Yale University. Across the 4 universities, we have close to 50 students participating, where all 50 of these students have been working together to develop materials, the survey, implement the process, and essentially designing and implementing the whole thing and doing all of the post-event analysis as well. And really, the students in collaboration with the Academy chose the topics. We created briefing materials as well. The event is going to be on November 6th. As Jim was noting, we have a nationally representative sample of 500 people in the 18 to 29 cohort, because the American Academy is very interested in what young people think about democracy in the US. Unfortunately, we did an event in May, and those results that we got in May also of the 18 to 29 cohort, we asked them questions about what they thought of democracy in the United States. at present. And unfortunately, they don't have very high ratings for what's happening in this country. They rated on a 0 to 10 scale that the US was doing maybe a 4 out of 5, 4 out of 10, sorry, 4 to 5 out of a 10 point scale, whereas the general public thinks it's a bit higher than that. So really, American Academy is interested in what the young people think and how and in what ways young people think that they can help improve democracy in this country. We're really fortunate that we're partnering with American Academy to do this. The results will be a feature in their Democracy Summit in mid-November, for which it is the summit run by the American Academy is going to be featured in the Biden administration's Global Democracy Summit that will be held in December. So, we're really hoping that we're able to at least give this country an idea of what young people want for the future of the United States. So we're looking to scale in many different ways, be in numbers, in millions, with the general public, but also in all different types of communities. And so whether they are in middle school, high school, colleges, and universities across the country in any way possible.
Okay, now we are getting questions. So let me ask you one, and we have a couple of people who asked a similar question, that many of the examples given were fairly progressive. How are results when more traditional conservative ideas are posed?
Oh, we have, when we develop the options and materials, we have an advisory committee that goes right across the spectrum. And there were proposals for climate change, for example, to just leave it to the market. Those proposals went down in support, even among the Republicans. But that's just an example. There were a variety of proposals, and the proposals that you saw for on immigration, many of those were Republican proposals that Republicans dropped in support for. So we try to get a balance of Republican leaning and Democratic leaning, or just various perspectives. If the issue is not particularly partisan, just various perspectives, and the sample then deliberates, and we see the results. And we're usually surprised by at least some of the results.
So somebody asked about the automated polling, and did you had experts or moderators participate as well?
Well, you distinguished the small group discussions, which are, we had 104 of maybe 10 or so in each small group, in the small groups. But then we had plenary sessions where there were panels of experts, and all of that, the identity of the experts. I mean, we even had the fossil fuel industry represented among the experts. If you look at the expert panels, and they participated very, in an evidence-based way, very constructively, but in the climate change one. But you can see that we had a range of experts, and they answered questions that were developed in the small groups. You saw the question development phase in the small groups. So I have this vision of doing this for very large numbers, and then putting the expert sessions on YouTube, and then having, so that everybody can see them, and having a sampling of the questions, because we find that many of the questions from the small groups overlap or are different versions of saying some of the same things. So we would select from all the questions to try to cover all the issues, and then have these plenary sessions broadcast on the web periodically. And that's how we would scale it, so that the people who were scaling, who were part of the deliberative scaling, would have the same experience of the small groups and asking their questions, et cetera. And some of them would be asked to take surveys as well, so we could see where the opinion is going. But they wouldn't be representative of the public the way a a good sample is.
Somebody asked if the handbook was available generally.
Yeah, Alice can give it to you.
Well, it's not just us, but participants in this, the audience is wondering about that.
Yeah. Alice will. I mean, it may be somewhere on our website, which we're renovating soon, but it's probably there in some version. But she can provide it to those who request it. Sure.
And I know that I've looked at your website too, and there's a question about this as well. Do you follow up with the participants to see if their new views are long-lasting? Might they revert to their old views once they return to their like-minded friends?
Yes and yes and no. We studied this. We had an opportunity to study this, and we presented a paper at the American Political Science Association a few weeks ago about this, because it was very interesting. But one of the most interesting answers to that was actually published in the New York Times at the time of the election, because we went back soon before the election, and we asked many of the same questions, and we also asked them how they were going to vote, and we asked the control group those same questions, and the control group. So here I'm treading on potentially hot coals or getting myself into hot water. But since this is a public result, the New York Times published it. It's not a secret, because something very dramatic happened, and we're trying to explain it. In fact, we have a paper now that explains it. So a lot of the particular policy details reverted back during the year. Remember, it's a very contentious year-long election. But the participants who deliberated changed their voting intention rather decisively compared to the control group. The control group was just like the American public at the beginning, and it was just like the American public at the end. The control group got the election, had about 3 points difference between Biden and Trump in the election. The deliberators had, I don't know, it was something like 19 points difference in support for Biden rather than Trump. I won't say that the deliberations turned these people into Democrats, far from it, but they thought, given the choice on offer, that it was particularly the people in the middle of the political spectrum who moved to either vote for Biden when they wouldn't otherwise vote at all, or to vote for Biden when they were sort of otherwise be in the middle and would be on the fence in the control group. And so we think that they also thought the people who changed, who voted that way, were also the ones who had who thought their voice counted. We had a question about whether you have opinions that matter after the weekend, and they were the ones who changed their views during the weekend, and they were the ones who became more informed, even following the weekend, during the year following the deliberation. So we think we're now explaining this in terms of we created more engaged citizens. We activated some of them to follow the campaign more closely. They were more concerned about COVID. They were thinking about the election issues. They thought their voice mattered. And they were making a more coherent connection between their policy views and their voting intention. So all of these things we think are good. And given that choice, that's the way they came out. So we found a big effect, and we're writing up the paper for submission to the political science journals because it was such a big change. Well, the New York Times decided to print the pictures of all the people again and feature that as a result. So we were quite pleased with that, but we've been working to explain it. I wouldn't say that we turned them into Democrats, these people in the middle, but that was how they voted. We didn't change their party affiliation or anything else, but given the choices that were on offer at that point in the election, if you think back to November.
So I think that one of the questions that I imagine a lot of people have, but Gloria is asking it. You had the ability to get a wide variety of people. You had the organizational ability to be able to work with partners who could identify people, and you paid them and got them to come. But the challenge is getting the mix of willing participants from different demographics together to willingly gather together. Please share ideas on how to get folks with different points of view to sit down together, either virtually or in person, to have such deliberative talks.
I think you need diverse partners. And remember, each small group does not have to be as diverse as a national random sample, because we got these changes in small groups of 10 people, just lots of them. But the small groups just need to have different points of view, different backgrounds. So if we had partners who represented different organizations, different parts of the country, different viewpoints, and we had them recruit for these online dialogues together, we could get a considerable diversity, opinion diversity, as well as some demographic diversity, considerable diversity in these discussions. We just need to make the partnerships. And Alice is working to this to some extent by this initiative. She only described 3 or 4 universities, but we've actually got 14 universities so far. And we think we can get more for the young people, but we think organizations of adults who represent different points of view, but who are open to discussion, we could have them recruit the people and scale it. And then I think once people do this, they tend to love it, as Alice was describing, and they may want to do it again, or they may want to help recruit others. And we're trying to think through the best way to spread it. But that's our aspiration. That's why we developed this technology, was to spread it. But I think that we need all kinds of discussions. So yes, it may be that the League of Women Voters in locally here is not as diverse in viewpoints as would be ideal, but there might be groups across the country who could be paired, who would work together for the same deliberation. And the magic of the internet is you could connect them all together. So this needs to be worked through, but that's just a thought.
Yes, Lisa, we went from like 2 questions to now I have 19 that I haven't even gotten to. There are just lots of questions.
I think I better shut up. I think I better have Alice talk, because I don't mean to filibuster here.
Actually, yeah, we promised an opportunity for people to share their thoughts and suggestions, because part of our interest is how we can have similar discussions and deliberations focused on more local issues and within our communities, so that we can work through some of our issues that are dividing us. So at this time, I want to open it up for people to share their thoughts and ideas or ask more questions. So if you would like to comment or have a suggestion, use the raise hand function under reactions at the bottom of the screen or in the participants window, and you'll be added to the queue, and we will call on people as they appear in the queue. Or if not, oh, I see one raised hand. Michael Abramson. I will ask you, please also limit your comments to 1 minute so that we can have more opportunity for people to speak.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, so there are 2 questions and 2 different kinds of groups who could be very interested in this. Question number 1, how can we help in what you are doing? And question number 2, how can we benefit from what you are doing? And 2 kinds of groups is, one is the groups like Braver Angels, Crossing Party Lines, Fix US, and I cannot even remember all of them. who are going in the same direction generally, and they would greatly benefit from your technology, I guess. And another kind of groups is local activist groups like YIMBYs, sustainability groups concerned about sustainability at local level, and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts about how all these groups and organizations could work together with you and mutually benefit from this relationship? Thank you.
Alice, we've talked to and had a lot of conversations with Fix US and with
we've spoken with Brave Angels.
And
many similar organizations. Yes.
Yeah, and we're interested in working with them. We've just been doing this climate change thing opportunity plopped into our laps a few months ago, and on very short notice, we've had to put it together. But we're interested in those conversations, and that's a very well chosen list of such organizations. Alice, I've talked too much. You may have some other ideas for how we can engage community groups. And we have actually done local deliberations. We did one for San Mateo County some years ago about the housing and development choices. And it was a successful deliberation. And we've done other local things.
Yeah, we've done a number of local events. And in fact, having initial conversations and having local community deliberation in the 1st District in Chicago. And so, you know, we are interested in having deliberation at all levels, whether face-to-face or online, and to really help plant seeds and enable more people to engage in this way.
Thank you. Ben, I am unmuting. You can unmute yourself.
I have unmuted myself. Actually, before I go on, I don't know if I thought Michael had asked, you know, like what are the benefits and what are, you know, how could you know, deliberative polling benefit us, and how can we help deliberative polling as well? So I don't know if those two were answered.
Well,
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Benefits are to the members,
Yep.
in that people greatly value, in fact, they're often trying to organize reunions. They greatly value the opportunity, the experience of deliberation. It can often be transformative for the members. I mean, we get contacted even years later by people who engaged in a deliberative poll, and we think this experience would be very similar in this deliberative scaling. So I don't know how it depends on the nature and aims of the organization, whether it benefits them, but certainly the kind of organization that convened this event tonight has very similar aims, I think, to foster more informed participation in the political process. So the aims are very consonant. How you can benefit deliberative polling? Well, I think that involves helping us think through how we can create a coalition of organizations that would be involved in scaling or fostering some local applications that would set an example.
Okay, so now that I've helped Michael answer his questions, nice to see you again, Alice. It's been a while. I think that it sounds like you are sort of, your vision is with the AI and so forth is to make it so that you know, you like deliberative polling as an idea, as an institution could spread, sort of scale like much further than, you know, just the Stanford incarnation, right? And I'm just wondering, like, you know, what do you foresee as being the bottlenecks for that? You know, like, is it training the moderators, training people who run these events? I mean, it seems like with the AI, you've got part of that already down. And I guess the reason I'm asking that is, like, I wonder how it could be, scaled, like, so that you could, like more and more people could run these kind of events anywhere they wanted.
Well, we have, years ago, we created a handbook, or a toolkit anyway, and then a handbook, and, we got some pickup, but I think it needs, the trouble is, we live in a time of great polarization where a lot of people in a lot of countries that I've dealt with are fearful from convening meetings because people will just show up and yell at each other, and it would be very unpleasant. And so this kind of discussion, some people find it surprising, but it actually works. And with the online tool, it works. And with good moderators face-to-face, it works. So we think it takes organization and effort. We're a tiny organization, but we work with partners all over the world who bring much more manpower and effort and resources for particular projects. So we may be small, but we play well with others. And so we need more allies, and we need to build coalitions. So, and we have the data and controlled experiments that our approach really works, and an awful lot of other approaches don't. But that doesn't mean we're the only one. There are going to be other approaches that will pan out when people go to the trouble of trying to really test them. And that's great, because the more deliberation and discussion with various formats that take place that work, the better our democracy will be, and other democracies as well. Democracy is under threat because people think that given the deadlock from polarization, we can't do anything. So we need to foster this kind of effort. So we're looking for allies, help, projects, and we're open to suggestion.
Okay, let's.
And this is not the beginning of a startup. We're a nonprofit. We're part of a university, so we're not trying to make $1 billion like all the students in my classes. They all think they're going to have a startup. We're just trying to help democracy.
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Hello.
Hello.
You segued almost perfectly to the topic that I wanted to raise, which is, as you talk about scaling, the thing that pops into my mind as being your primary challenge is going to be just money, because you're going to have organizations that are actively against what you're trying to achieve, which is understanding and normalization, which yields less emotion and less engagement in one direction or the other, like i.e. the splitting. And so, like, I'd ask the question, how are you going to make a measurable difference without finding effectively a business model or somebody who is willing to throw what is ridiculous scale money into turning this into something that actually moves the needle in some direction? Is anybody working on said business model? Like, in the 10 minutes, I haven't come up with one, but.
We just get partners. Even business enterprises help us. Look at, if you look at under American One Room, Snapchat sponsored 8 documentaries about it and put it on Snapchat, and you can see it on our web by an Academy Award-winning filmmaker. And they're beautiful. They're short documentaries, 8 minutes or something. I think they're 8 minutes, something like that, Alice. So they're short. But just in order to sort of dramatize the concept. So I think we can get allies in the business community. We're not threatening. I don't think we're at the point where we're threatening anybody. And surely everybody has to be in favor of some informed dialogue. But of course, much bigger forces are interested in disinformation and manipulation. And, I'm not Pollyannish about this, but on good issues, if you get the right projects and you can dramatize the public's points of view when they think about it, you can move mountains. I mean, we've done this in a bunch of countries. We're even required by law in some countries. I think that particularly when there are hard issues, we can be helpful. As to whether there's a business model behind that, no, I'm totally impractical about that. But it's been, I think, remarkably successful. I mean, in terms of all these projects in all these countries. On particular issues, we need to find allies. So if you have an idea about the right business model, let us know. But we're, for the moment, we're going from one project to the next. We're hoping to do political reform with the American Academy and with other allies on the model of America in One Room. And we're hoping to do some other issues too.
Yeah, Alex in the chat is actually following up on the exact thing that I was about to say, which is, how do you define success? Like, is it, in my mind, success would be the number of people reached, because you've already demonstrated that when you reach people, that you are able to produce a shift towards what is hopefully more data-driven, reality-driven results in both directions. But that success only comes when you reach a certain number of people. Like, are you collecting metrics? Do you have goals? Like, where are you trying to take this in terms of, like, how many people in the US, how many people in other countries are you getting there? And I don't know if Alex had other ideas as well for what success means in his mind.
Well, you're certainly raising the bar. I mean, we've mostly been thinking about success for the random sample of people who were then, whose conclusions in effect are a recommendation to policymakers about what to do. And we've transformed the wind power in Texas. We produced a constitutional amendment in Mongolia. We helped reform the healthcare and pension system in Chile. We've provided input to the Canadian government recently on foreign policy issues. We've dealt with, we've helped integrate the previously Roma-only segregated schools in Bulgaria. We've worked in Northern Ireland. We've done all kinds of countries and places where the deliberative polling has made a constructive impact. The question that I feel now that animates me is that we don't just need a deliberative poll, we need a deliberative society. And that's why we're trying to scale. And for that, we will need partners. Maybe we can get one of these social media companies to help us recruit people who might want to deliberate. And then we scale that to larger and larger numbers. I think people really are surprised when they experience something like this, how interesting and satisfying it is to talk to people very different from themselves. So I think it could spread, maybe not like lightning the way some notorious falsehood does on social media, but it could spread from one person to another. So it was sort of like a slow cooking rather than a fast heating project or culinary project. So I don't know. Maybe we won't ever get a deliberative society. Maybe we'll just have deliberative polls in specific policy areas. But I do think the idea of communities deliberating together more broadly than a scientific sample is how to motivate that. That's the next frontier for us. And I think organizations like yours could possibly help. Not necessarily yours unless you're especially motivated to help, but organizations like yours and maybe yours and others. That's one of the next steps.
Thank you.
Karen, do you have we have just a few minutes left. Do you have another question?
Well, I actually just wanted to say, this came up several times. It was, can this model be applied to our Congress?
I don't know. Members of Congress, I teach when Larry Diamond and I teach together. I start the course with the Athenians, and then the American founders, and Madison's writing about the Senate and the rest. The Senate was supposed to be a deliberative body. They used to even call themselves the world's greatest deliberative body, but parties, party discipline has interfered with that. And I think the way to start is with the people, and then change the incentives for members. And members would actually like to do the right thing if it doesn't cost them re-election, it doesn't interfere with their fundraising, doesn't interfere with whatever implicit understanding they have with their donors. They would like to do the right thing. And there are all kinds of issues. But I was very surprised, by the way, the Harvard webinar, which is on YouTube, and there's a link you can play it, about our climate change results, actually had a constructive dialogue after we presented the results, actually had a constructive dialogue about the results with Lindsey Graham and Jeanne Shaheen. That is a Republican and a Democratic senator, who were actually very evidence-based about what they thought should be done about climate change in light of our results and in light of their own thinking. So maybe on the right issue, you could get members of Congress deliberating. But I just think it would, that the public is more promising, because the public has this great untapped good sense if you can figure out how to tap into it and engage it. And that provides a model for the arguments which others can invoke in solving our big problems.
Well, thank you, James and Alice. You've really given us a lot to think about. And but we're coming to the end of our time, and we hope that everybody has found this event worthwhile. Our league is just starting our work on encouraging more collaborative discussions, and so we'll be talking to you more. If you would like to learn more about the Center for Deliberative Democracy or the League, we have put the website addresses in the chat. Also, I will be sending out a survey tomorrow to get your feedback about this and future events. We really would appreciate if you would take a few minutes to help us complete it. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.
Oh, Benjamin Lai made a comment in the chat, which I've been advocating for years and trying to find the right opportunity for. Ben, if I can call you Ben, says, I think that political leaders should hold deliberative polling events instead of town halls. I actually wrote an op-ed in the New York Times making that case some years ago. It's on our website. But I think that that it would be extremely useful to do something like that. But, you know, like many ideas, sometimes my ideas just remain hypothetical. But you had the same insight. We're on the same page. Maybe someday we'll get that going. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, with everyone here, together we can make it happen.
One community at a time.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, it's Alice's can-do spirit that will conquer the world, I think. I just follow along.
Well, it's been a fascinating discussion. We appreciate your coming, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you.